Her words cut deep. "You're too old-fashioned for my wedding." She didn't say it with care, she said it with contempt. The kind of look only a daughter gives when she's forgotten who her father really is. In that moment, it felt like the ground disappeared under me. This wasn't just rejection, it was a sentence. I was the man who carried her in my arms, who worked nights so she could have every chance in life. And now I was tossed aside like some piece of old furniture that didn't fit her perfect show. The insult came before the ceremony, but the scorn lingered through the whole night. I saw it in the guests' faces, their smirks, their averted eyes, like I was an intruder, a stain on the picture-perfect wedding she wanted to display. But inside, defeat never grew. Instead, a fire lit, the resolve to make justice prevail no matter what. Because when dignity and love are replaced with humiliation and mockery, ungrateful people need a lesson. My name is Terry Cross, and what my daughter never imagined is that her words would become the spark I needed to turn her wedding into the stage of my revenge. And believe me, when justice shows up, not even a child's arrogance can silence it. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, even by your own family? But before I reveal how I stole the show that night, I need to tell you who I was before that wedding, and why. My daughter thought she could bury me under the label of old-fashioned. You see, at 69 years old, I've lived through more than most people could imagine. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, came back to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what we'd been through, and built a life from scratch with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn determination. Sarah's mother, my beloved Linda, used to say I had old-fashioned values in the best possible way. She meant honor, loyalty, keeping your word, and putting family above everything else. Those weren't outdated concepts to us. They were the foundation of everything worth building. When Linda died of cancer 12 years ago, Sarah was just 17. A smart girl, honor roll student, full scholarship to Northwestern University waiting for her. But she was also angry, confused, and grieving in ways that made her push against everything that reminded her of loss. I became both father and mother. Overnight, I learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, figured out the difference between concealer and foundation when she had her first heartbreak, and somehow managed to get her through senior prom without completely embarrassing her. "Dad, you're doing great," she used to tell me during those late-night talks we'd have in the kitchen. "Mom would be so proud of how you're taking care of us." Us. That word used to mean something. I worked 3 jobs to keep her in that private school, to make sure college was paid for without student loans. Mornings at the lumber yard, afternoons running my small construction business, weekends doing handyman work for anyone who'd pay cash. My hands were never clean, my back always ached, but Sarah's future was secure. She graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in marketing, landed a job at a prestigious firm in Chicago, and started making more money in her first year than I'd ever seen in mine. I was proud. Hell, I was bursting with pride, but somewhere between Northwestern and that corner office, my daughter started looking at me differently. The first time I noticed it was Thanksgiving 2019. She brought home a boyfriend, some guy named Trevor, with soft hands and a BMW. During dinner, I told a story about my construction crew, something funny that happened on a job site, and Sarah actually rolled her eyes. "Dad, maybe we should talk about something more sophisticated," she said, her voice carrying that new tone I didn't recognize. Trevor smirked into his wine glass. Sophisticated. Like the stories of men who built things with their hands weren't worth sharing at a dinner table I'd built myself. That was the beginning of the slow fade. Phone calls became shorter, visits became less frequent, and when she did come home, there was always this underlying current of embarrassment, like she was slumming it in her childhood home. Then she met Blake. Blake Henderson III. Yes, he actually used the Roman numerals. was everything. I wasn't. Harvard law, family money going back generations, a trust fund that probably cost more than my entire house. He wore suits that cost more than my truck payment and spoke in that careful, measured way that rich people use when they want to sound important. Sarah called me on a Tuesday in March 2023, practically breathless with excitement. "Dad," Blake proposed, "we're getting married next spring at the Riverside Country Club. It's going to be incredible. 200 guests, full orchestra, everything perfect." I should have been happy. I should have been thrilled that my daughter found someone who made her smile, but something in her voice made my chest tight. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. When do I get to meet this Blake officially?" A pause. Just long enough to feel wrong. "Oh, well, we're still figuring out all the details. You know how busy things get with wedding planning." I didn't know, actually. Linda and I had gotten married at City Hall with 2 witnesses and a $5 bouquet from the grocery store, but I said I understood. Over the next few months, I heard about Blake constantly. Blake's family had a house in the Hamptons. Blake's father was partners with a state senator. Blake's mother served on the board of 3 different charities. Blake, always with this breathless admiration that used to be reserved for the people who actually mattered. The engagement party invitation arrived in the mail 4 days after the event. Not lost in the mail, not sent to the wrong address, just 4 days late, like an afterthought. When I called Sarah about it, she was full of apologies that didn't quite ring true. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. The invitations got mixed up at the printer's office. You know how these things go with wedding vendors." I didn't know, but I was starting to learn. The wedding planning became this mysterious process that somehow never included me. Every suggestion I made was gently dismissed. Every offer to help was politely declined. When I asked about walking her down the aisle, Sarah got that look again, the one where she seemed to be calculating something. "Of course you'll walk me down the aisle, Dad, but Blake's family has some traditional expectations about how these things should go. Maybe we should talk about what you'll wear, what you'll say during your speech, just to make sure everything flows smoothly. Everything flows smoothly." Translation: make sure you don't embarrass us in front of the important people. That's when I started to understand that I wasn't being included in my daughter's wedding. I was being managed. The final straw came 3 weeks before the ceremony. Sarah and Blake were in town for what she called last-minute venue coordination, and they stopped by the house. I'd been working on refinishing Linda's old hope chest, thinking Sarah might want it in her new home. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, sitting on the edge of my couch like she was afraid it might contaminate her designer clothes. Blake stood behind her, checking his phone with that particular brand of impatience that rich people wear like cologne. "About what, sweetheart?" "About the wedding, about your role in the wedding." Role, like I was an actor in her production instead of her father. Blake's family is very traditional, very proper. They expect a certain level of sophistication at family events. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "What exactly are you trying to say, Sarah?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "Your stories, Dad. The way you talk about work, about the old days, about Mom. It's very blue-collar, very down-to-earth. And Blake's parents, they wouldn't understand." "Understand what?" "Your sense of humor, your stories, the way you see the world. You're just very old-fashioned." There it was, the word that would change everything between us. Old-fashioned, like honor was outdated, like loyalty was embarrassing, like the values that built the life she'd lived so comfortably were somehow shameful in the presence of people who'd inherited their worth instead of earning it. "What are you asking me to do, Sarah?" Blake finally looked up from his phone. "Maybe just keep the stories simple. Nothing too elaborate. These people appreciate brevity. These people. Not our people, not family. These people." I looked at my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd stayed up all night with when she had pneumonia, the college graduate who'd once told me I was her hero, and I didn't recognize her anymore. "I understand," I said quietly, and I did understand. I understood that my daughter had traded her father for social status. I understood that the life I'd built for her had been deemed insufficient for the life she wanted to build for herself. I understood that love and sacrifice meant nothing when measured against the approval of strangers. But what Sarah didn't understand was that dismissing a 69-year-old man who'd fought in a war, buried his wife, and raised his daughter alone wasn't just cruel. It was a mistake, because old-fashioned men like me, we don't just roll over when we're pushed aside. We've been through too much, lost too much, and fought too hard to let anyone, even our own children, decide our worth. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Sarah thought she'd solved her old-fashioned father problem with a simple conversation. She had no idea that conversation had just created a much bigger problem, one that would make her perfect wedding absolutely unforgettable. The plan started, forming the very next morning, over coffee and the local newspaper. The Riverside County Gazette had a small announcement about upcoming community events, and one item caught my attention. Veterans Memorial Fund seeks community support for annual recognition ceremony. I'd been involved with the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post for decades, but this year I'd been too distracted by wedding preparations to pay much attention to their planning. Now, suddenly, it seemed like the most important thing in the world. I called Harold Mathis, the VFW commander, before 8 a.m. "Terry, good to hear from you. We missed you at the last planning meeting." "Harold, tell me about this memorial ceremony you're organizing." "Well, it's nothing fancy. Same as every year, honoring the guys from our area who didn't make it home. We usually hold it at the Legion Hall, maybe get 40 or 50 people." "Why?" "What if I told you we could do something bigger this year, something that would really honor their memory?" Harold's voice perked up with interest. "What did you have in mind?" "What if we could fund a proper ceremony, rent a real venue, get some media coverage, make it an event that the whole community would remember?" "Terry, that sounds incredible, but the budget—" "Don't worry about the budget, I'll handle that." The truth was, I had money. More than Sarah knew, more than I'd ever let on. 47 years of careful saving, smart investments, and living below my means had left me with a nest egg that could have bought 10 weddings like the one my daughter was planning. Linda, and I'd always planned to use that money for something meaningful. Travel, maybe, or helping Sarah buy her first house, or eventually spoiling grandchildren. We'd called it our Someday Fund. Well, someday had arrived. By noon, I'd committed to funding a complete Veterans Memorial ceremony. Professional catering, live music, guest speakers, proper decorations. Everything Sarah's wedding would have, but with a purpose that actually mattered. "When were you thinking of holding this?" Harold asked as we met at the diner to finalize. "Details." I pulled out my phone and checked Sarah's wedding invitation, still magneted to my refrigerator. "May 15th, 2 p.m. "May 15th, I said. 2 p.m. would be perfect," Harold raised an eyebrows. "Isn't that my daughter's wedding?" "Yes, it is." He studied my face for a long moment. Harold had known me for 20 years, had served in Vietnam just 2 years after I did. He understood things without needing explanations. "You sure about this timing, Terry?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." We shook hands across the table, two old soldiers who knew what it meant to have your back against the wall. The next week became a flurry of planning that reminded me why I'd been successful in construction. When you have a clear vision and unlimited resources, things move fast. I rented the Riverside Community Center, the same building where Sarah had graduated from high school, where Linda and I had attended school board meetings and community theater productions. It wasn't as fancy as the country club, but it had something the country club would never have: heart. The catering came from Murphy's local kitchen, run by Tom Murphy, whose son Kevin had died in Afghanistan in 2009. Tom didn't just provide food, he provided a mission. "This is important work you're doing, Terry," he said as we planned the menu. Kevin would have loved something like this. The local high school marching band agreed to perform. The mayor committed to speaking. The newspaper promised front-page coverage. Even the regional TV station expressed interest in covering what they called a heartwarming community tribute to local heroes. But the most important call I made was to Danny Rodriguez. Danny had been my point man in Vietnam, a kid from Texas who'd saved my life twice and never let me forget it. After the war, he'd become a successful businessman in Houston, but more importantly, he'd become a professional speaker for veterans organizations across the country. Terry Cross, you old son of a gun. What's it been, 5 years? Danny, I need a favor. Name it. I need you to come to Iowa and give the speech of your life. When and where? May 15th, 2 p.m. And Danny, this one really matters. There was a pause. Danny knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. You got it, brother. What's this really about? Justice. The best kind. I'll be there. As the plans came together, I realized I was creating something beautiful, not just an event, but a statement, a reminder of what actually mattered in this world. While Sarah worried about flower arrangements and seating charts for people who would forget her wedding within a month, I was organizing a tribute to men who'd given their lives for strangers they'd never met. While Blake's family obsessed over which wines to serve with which courses, I was coordinating with veterans who still remembered the taste of fear and the weight of brotherhood. While my daughter stressed about impressing people who judge her regardless, I was building something that would honor memories that actually deserved to be honored. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah had called me old-fashioned like it was an insult, but old-fashioned meant honoring sacrifice, respecting service, and putting principles above appearances. If that was old-fashioned, then I was proud to be exactly what she'd accused me of being. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah called with another small request. "Dad, about your speech at the reception." "What about it?" "Blake's father is giving the main toast, and the maid of honor is doing a tribute to our friendship. So we really just need you to keep yours short. Maybe just a minute or two, something simple about how proud you are, a minute or two, to summarize 24 years of loving my daughter, of sacrificing for her future, of being the only parent she had left." "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood that I was being erased from my own daughter's wedding, reduced to a footnote in her perfect story. But what Sarah didn't understand was that while she was minimizing my role in her celebration, I was maximizing my impact somewhere else entirely. On May 15th at 2 p.m., Sarah would be saying "I do" to a man who'd convinced her that her father wasn't good enough for their new life. At exactly the same time, I'd be saying "thank you" to men who'd died believing that everything, including family, was worth fighting for. We'd see which event people remembered. The transformation in Sarah didn't happen overnight. It was more like watching a slow-motion car crash that took 3 years to fully unfold. I first met Blake at Christmas dinner 2021. Sarah had been dating him for about 6 months, and she was practically glowing with excitement when she brought him home to Cedar Falls. "Dad, this is Blake Henderson. Blake, this is my father, Terry." Blake had the kind of handshake that boardroom consultants probably taught in seminars. Firm, but not too firm. Exactly 2 pumps. Direct eye contact with a calculated smile. Everything about him seemed rehearsed, from his perfectly styled hair to his casual but expensive sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mr. Cross, Sarah's told me so much about you. It's an honor to meet a veteran." The way he said veteran felt like he was checking a box. Respectful veteran interaction, complete. During dinner, I told some stories about the construction business, about the characters I'd worked with over the years. Sarah used to love those stories. She'd laugh at Big Mike's legendary stubbornness, or shake her head at the ridiculous situations we'd find ourselves in, trying to meet impossible deadlines. But that night, every time I started a story, I caught Sarah shooting warning glances at Blake, like she was apologizing for me in advance. "Dad tells the best stories about his work," she said, but her tone suggested the opposite. "He's got 1 million of them." Blake smiled politely and steered the conversation toward safer topics: Sarah's career, their shared interest in wine tasting, their weekend trips to Chicago's cultural districts. After dinner, while Sarah was loading the dishwasher, Blake and I found ourselves alone on the back porch. He was checking his phone when he looked up and seemed to remember I existed. "You've got a beautiful property here, Mr. Cross. Very authentic." Authentic, the way. He said it made it sound quaint and slightly pitiful. "Built most of it myself," I said. "The deck, the gazebo where Linda used to read, that workshop where I taught Sarah to use tools. That's impressive. Very hands-on." He glanced at his Rolex. Yes, he actually wore a Rolex. "Sarah's mentioned you're quite the craftsman." She used to like helping me with projects. "Remember when we built that tree house in the backyard? Took us 3 weekends, but she was so proud when we finished it." Blake's smile became more strained. "Sarah's always been ambitious, even as a child, I imagine." Something in his tone bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was like he was rewriting my daughter's childhood to fit some narrative I wasn't part of. The real shift started after that visit. Sarah's phone calls became shorter and more infrequent. When she did call, the conversations felt scripted, like she was checking items off a daughter duty list. "How's your health, Dad? Are you eating well? Is the house holding up okay?" Gone were the rambling conversations about her work, her dreams, the random thoughts that used to spill out of her like water from a broken dam. Instead, I got status updates delivered in the same tone she probably used for client check-ins. Next time I saw them together was Easter 2022. Sarah had insisted on hosting dinner at a restaurant instead of the traditional family meal at home. "It's just easier, Dad. Blake's not really used to big family dinners, and this way nobody has to worry about cooking or cleaning." Nobody had to worry about family traditions either, apparently. At dinner, Blake dominated the conversation with stories about his law firm's high-profile cases. He name-dropped judges and politicians like they were personal friends, described legal strategies like military campaigns, and generally made it clear that his world operated on a level the rest of us couldn't comprehend. Sarah hung on every word. "Blake just won this incredible case," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "Tell Dad about the Henderson versus Morrison settlement." I listened politely as Blake described a lawsuit that had made his firm millions while destroying a small family business. He told it like a victory story, complete with dramatic courtroom moments and strategic brilliance. "That's quite a story," I said when he finished. "The law is like war, Mr. Cross. You understand that, I'm sure. Sometimes you have to be ruthless to achieve justice." I'd been in an actual war. I knew the difference between necessary violence and inflicting pain for profit, but I kept my mouth shut. After dinner, Sarah walked me to my truck while Blake made calls about some urgent legal matter. "What do you think of Blake?" she asked, but her tone suggested there was only one acceptable answer. "He's very polished. Isn't he incredible? Dad, he's going places, real places. His firm is considering making him partner before he's 35. And quite an achievement, it is. And Dad," she touched my arm, her voice dropping to something more serious, "Blake comes from a very different world than us. His family, they have certain expectations about social situations, about how things should be done." "What kind of expectations?" "Nothing bad, just more formal, more refined. You know how some people are about etiquette and conversation topics and things like that?" I didn't know, actually. Linda and I had raised Sarah to be polite and respectful, but we'd never taught her that some people were inherently more valuable than others based on their bank accounts or social connections. "I'm not sure I follow, sweetheart." Sarah sighed, the way she used to when I didn't understand her high school math homework. Blake's parents are very sophisticated. They summer in Martha's Vineyard. They donate to the opera. They know senators personally. When we have dinner with them, the conversation is usually about art, politics, cultural events. Very intellectual stuff, as opposed to the very unintellectual stuff her old man talked about, apparently. "I see. I just want you to know that when you meet them, it might be good to, focus on your business. Success. Maybe talk about your investments or your military service. They respect that kind of thing. Talk about my investments." I almost laughed. Sarah had no idea that my investments could buy and sell Blake's family twice over, but she was asking me to perform respectability for people who'd probably never earned an honest dollar in their lives. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. By fall of 2022, the changes in Sarah were impossible to ignore. She'd always been ambitious, but now that ambition came with a coating of disdain for everything she'd grown up with. She stopped visiting Cedar Falls entirely, claiming she was too busy with work and social obligations. When I suggested driving up to Chicago to see her, she had excuses about her apartment being too small or her schedule being too packed. Our conversations became exercises in translation. Sarah would describe her new life in terms that seemed designed to emphasize how different it was from mine. Blake and I went to this amazing wine tasting in Napa. The sommelier was explaining terroir and vintage variations. It was so educational. Blake's taking me to the Art Institute Gala next month. It's a very exclusive event, by invitation only. We'll be sitting with some major collectors and gallery owners. Blake's family has invited us to their house in the Hamptons for Labor Day. It's going to be wonderful. Sailing, tennis, all very relaxed and elegant. Everything was amazing, incredible, wonderful and elegant. Everything was also completely separate from the life she'd lived for the first 22 years of her existence. The final blow came at Thanksgiving 2022. Sarah announced that she and Blake would be spending the holiday with his family in Connecticut. "It's important for Blake's career that I make a good impression with his parents," she explained over the phone. "His father has connections that could really help Blake's advancement." At the firm, "What about our traditions, Sarah? What about the turkey recipe your mother taught you? The stuffing we always make together? Dad, they're nice memories, but Blake and I are building new traditions now. More sophisticated ones." Sophisticated. There was that word again, like a knife twisting in old wounds. "I understand you're building a new life, sweetheart, but family traditions aren't supposed to be disposable." "Nothing's disposable, Dad. We're just evolving, growing. Blake has shown me that there's a whole world out there beyond Cedar Falls, beyond small-town thinking." Small-town thinking. Like loyalty was a character flaw, like remembering where you came from was a limitation rather than a foundation. "Maybe next year we can all spend Thanksgiving together," she added, but it sounded like the kind of promise people make when they don't intend to keep it. That Christmas, Sarah sent me a card with a photo of her and Blake at some fancy party. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my truck payment, and Blake had his arm around her like he was claiming territory. Inside, she'd written, "Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope you're well. Love, Sarah and Blake." No mention of coming home, no invitation to visit, just love from Sarah and Blake, like they were a single entity now. I stared at that card for a long time, sitting in the kitchen where Sarah used to do her homework while I cooked dinner. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but empty. That's when I realized I'd lost my daughter long before she'd gotten engaged. Blake hadn't stolen her from me. He'd simply shown her a mirror that reflected back everything she'd apparently always been ashamed of. The engagement announcement came via email in February 2023. Not a phone call, not a visit. An email with a professional photo attached. Dad, Blake proposed. We're thrilled to announce our engagement and begin planning our spring wedding. More details to follow. Love, Sarah. Even her engagement announcement sounded like a press release. I called her immediately, but it went to voicemail. When she finally called back 3 days later, her voice was bright and distant. Dad, did you get our announcement? Isn't it exciting? Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm happy for you. Blake proposed at this incredible restaurant in New York. The ring is absolutely stunning. It's been in his family for 3 generations. Of course it had. Everything about Blake came with a pedigree. When's the wedding? May 15th. We're having it at the Riverside Country Club. It's going to be absolutely perfect. 200 guests, full orchestra, the works. 200 guests. I wondered how many of them would actually know my daughter versus how many were Blake's family's social obligations. That sounds lovely, Sarah. I'm looking forward to being part of it. A pause, just long enough to feel ominous. Of course, Dad. We'll talk about all the details soon. But as the months passed, it became clear that my role in Sarah's wedding was being managed, not planned. Every conversation about the ceremony came with subtle guidelines about appropriate behavior, suitable topics of conversation, and the importance of making a good impression. Sarah wasn't planning a wedding that included her father. She was planning a performance where her father wouldn't embarrass her. And that's when I realized that my little girl, the one who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories, who'd cried in my arms when her mother died, who'd once told me I was her hero, was gone. In her place was a stranger who shared her face but not her heart, a woman who'd traded her soul for social status and convinced herself it was sophistication. Blake had won. He'd successfully convinced my daughter that everything she'd been raised to value was worthless compared to everything his money could buy. But Blake had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that because I was old-fashioned, I was also harmless. What do you think? Was I wrong to feel hurt by my daughter's transformation, or should I have just accepted that people change? Let me know in the comments below. Actually, let me tell you about the moment I realized this wasn't just about Sarah growing up. This was about something much darker than that. The moment of absolute clarity came 3 weeks before the wedding, during what Sarah called a family coordination meeting. She'd driven down from Chicago with Blake, ostensibly to finalize wedding details, but really to deliver a series of carefully rehearsed instructions about my expected behavior. We met at Rosie's Diner on Main Street, neutral territory, I suppose. Since Sarah clearly didn't want Blake spending any more time in the house where she'd grown up than absolutely necessary. Dad, we need to talk about the wedding logistics, Sarah began, sliding a folder across the table like she was presenting a business proposal. Inside were printed schedules, seating charts, and what appeared to be a script for my father of the bride. Speech, what's all this? Just some guidelines to help everything run smoothly, Blake interjected, his lawyer voice in full effect. Big weddings require precise coordination. I flipped through the pages, feeling increasingly incredulous. My arrival time, my designated seating location, my assigned conversation partners at the reception. Everything was mapped out like a military operation. This says, I'm walking you down the aisle at exactly 2:47 p.m. Right, Sarah said. The processional is timed to the orchestra, so we need to hit our marks precisely. And after I walk you down the aisle, I'm supposed to sit in the third row? Well, yes. The front row is reserved for Blake's parents and his grandparents. The second row is for Blake's siblings and their spouses. Where does that put me? third row, next to Aunt Martha and Uncle Bob. Aunt Martha and Uncle Bob, Linda's siblings, who I saw maybe twice a year. I was being seated with the extended family, not the immediate family. Sarah, I'm your father. Of course you are, Dad. But Blake's family has certain traditions about wedding seating arrangements. It's just how they do things, not how we do things, how they do things. I turned to the speech guidelines. 300 words maximum, no personal anecdotes, no mentions of Linda or Sarah's childhood, focus on welcoming Blake to the family and wishes for their future success. You wrote me a speech? We just provided some talking points, Blake said smoothly, to help you feel more confident speaking in front of such a distinguished crowd. Distinguished crowd, like I was some backwoods farmer who'd never spoken in public before. Blake, I've given eulogies at military funerals, spoken at city council meetings, and presented construction bids to corporate boards. I think I can handle talking about my own daughter. Of course you can, Sarah said quickly, shooting Blake a warning look. We just thought it might be nice to coordinate the speeches so they all flow together thematically. My daughter was editing my love for her to fit a theme, but the worst part was still coming. Dad, there's one more thing, Sarah said, her voice dropping to what I recognized as her nervous register, about the reception introductions. What about them? Blake leaned forward, taking charge of the conversation. Sarah and I have decided to handle the family introductions a little differently than traditional weddings might do. How so? Sarah couldn't meet my eyes. Well, Blake's family has a lot of important connections. Judges, politicians, business leaders, people who might be confused by complicated family dynamics. What's complicated about our family dynamics, Sarah? Nothing's complicated, Dad. It's just that, well, some of these people might not understand the whole story about Mom passing away, about you raising me alone, about our background, like our life together was something shameful that needed to be explained or hidden. So what are you proposing? Blake answered for her. We're introducing you as Sarah's father, obviously, but we're keeping the personal history simple, just basic facts. No need to get into the emotional details that might make people uncomfortable. Make people uncomfortable. My wife's death and my sacrifice to raise our daughter alone might make Blake's rich friends uncomfortable. And, Sarah added, her voice barely above a whisper, we're introducing you as Terry Cross, rather than, with all the military stuff. The military stuff? Your rank, your service record, the medals. Blake's crowd they're not military people. They might not relate to all that. They might not relate to the Bronze Star I'd earned pulling wounded soldiers out of a burning APC in Vietnam. They might not relate to 30 years of faithful service to my country. So let me understand this, I said, my voice staying calm through sheer force of will. I'm walking you down the aisle, then sitting in the third row with the extended family. I'm giving a 300-word speech written by your fiancé about welcoming him to our family. And I'm being introduced as just Terry Cross, with no mention of my military service or the fact that I raised you alone after your mother died. Dad, you're making this sound worse than it is. How is it, Sarah? She finally looked at me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that broke my heart. Not malice, not even calculation, just embarrassment. She was genuinely embarrassed by me. Dad, I love you. You know I love you. But Blake's family moves in very different circles than we do. They have different expectations, different standards. I just want to make sure everyone feels comfortable. Including me? Of course, including you. That's why we're having this conversation. To make sure you feel prepared and confident. Prepared and confident to pretend I was someone else. To minimize my role in my daughter's life, to hide the very experiences that had shaped me into the man who'd given her everything she'd ever needed. Blake was checking his phone, clearly ready to move on to more important matters. We should probably head out soon, Sarah. We have that appointment with the florist at 4. Right, Sarah said, gathering up her folder of instructions. Dad, you're okay with all this, right? I mean, it's just one day, and then everything goes back to normal. Normal. What was normal going to look like after my daughter's wedding, where I'd been reduced to a supporting character in my own family's story? I understand, I said. And I did understand. I understood that my daughter had made a choice between the man who'd raised her and the man she wanted to marry. I understood that love and loyalty meant less to her than social acceptance. I understood that the values I'd tried to instill in her had been overwritten by someone else's idea of success. But most importantly, I understood that Sarah had no idea who she was dealing with. After they left, I sat in Rosie's diner for another hour, drinking coffee and thinking about the folder of instructions Sarah had left behind. Guidelines for how I should behave at my own daughter's wedding. That's when I pulled out my phone and called Danny Rodriguez in Houston. Danny, it's Terry. I need to ask you something about that speech you're giving at the memorial ceremony. What? About it? How would you feel about making it really memorable? Something that would get people talking. Danny was quiet for a moment. Terry, what aren't you telling me about this event? Let's just say I want to make sure that on May 15th, people remember what's really important in this world. I'm listening. Honor, loyalty, sacrifice, the kind of values that built this country, the kind of character that some people seem to have forgotten in their rush to impress strangers. You want me to give a speech about real values versus fake sophistication? I want you to give a speech about what matters. About men who died for something bigger than themselves, while other people worry about seating charts and social status. Danny chuckled. Brother, that sounds like the kind of speech I was born to give. After I hung up, I looked at Sarah's instruction. Folder one more time. 300 words maximum. No personal anecdotes. Focus on welcoming Blake to the family. I tore it up and threw it in the trash. If Sarah wanted to reduce me to a footnote in her perfect wedding story, that was her choice. But she'd forgotten something important about old-fashioned men like me. We don't disappear quietly. I promise you, what's coming next will show you exactly what happens when you underestimate a father's love and his determination to teach a lesson. That needs to be learned. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Linda's funeral. I opened a bottle of her favorite wine, a 1995 Cabernet Sauvignon we'd been saving for a special occasion that never came, and I sat down with a legal pad to plan the most important mission of my life. Not a mission of destruction, but of demonstration. Not revenge in the petty sense, but justice in the truest sense. See, here's what Sarah and Blake didn't understand about old-fashioned men like me. We're not just stubborn and set in our ways. We're strategic. We've been through hell, learned to think under pressure, and discovered that the best victories aren't won through force. They're won through truth. I started by making a list of every person Sarah had mentioned would be at her wedding. Blake's parents, of course, his extended family from Connecticut, the judges and politicians from his father's network, the country club crowd that Sarah was so desperate to impress, 200 people who'd judge my daughter based on her ability to distance herself from everything real in her life. Then I made a second list. Every veteran in Cedar Falls and the surrounding counties. Every construction worker I'd employed over the years, every neighbor who'd brought casseroles after Linda died, every teacher who'd encouraged Sarah through school, every coach who'd believed in her potential. Two very different groups of people, one that valued appearances and one that valued authenticity. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Harold Mathis from the VFW. Terry, I've been thinking about this memorial ceremony you're funding. It's generous as hell, but I have to ask, why now? Why? This particular year? Harold, how long have we known each other? Going on 25 years. In all that time, have I ever done anything without a good reason? Can't say that you have. This ceremony isn't just about honoring the dead, Harold. It's about reminding the living what honor actually looks like. Harold was quiet for a moment. This wouldn't have anything to do with your daughter's wedding. Being the same day, would it? It might. Terry, I know we're old soldiers, but family situations are delicate. You sure you want to mix the two? Harold, my daughter has decided that everything I taught her about character and values is embarrassing. She's marrying into a family that judges people by their bank accounts instead of their backbone. She thinks sophistication means forgetting where you came from. That's a tough spot, brother. So I'm going to give her a choice. She can spend May 15th celebrating superficial bullshit with people who don't know her real story, or she can spend it honoring genuine sacrifice with people who understand what actually matters. And if she chooses the wedding, then she'll know what she chose, and more importantly, everyone else will know what she chose. Harold chuckled. You devious old bastard. You're not just planning a memorial ceremony, you're planning a character test. I'm planning an education. The next morning, I started making calls. Not angry calls, not dramatic calls, just quiet, purposeful conversations with people who mattered. First, I called Tom Murphy at the catering company. Tom, I want to make sure we're creating something special for this memorial ceremony, something that honors not just the men we lost, but the values they died protecting. What did you have in mind, Terry? I want every detail to reflect genuine respect, not artificial sophistication. Real food, not fancy presentations. Honest music, not pretentious performances. The kind of event that feels like a sacred duty, not a social obligation. I understand completely. My boy Kevin would have loved that approach. Next, I called the high school marching band director, Mr. Peterson, about the performance for the memorial ceremony. I'd like to request something specific. Of course, Mr. Cross, what would you like? Amazing Grace played with full military honors. And taps at the end, performed the way it was meant to be performed, slowly, precisely, with complete reverence. That's beautiful, Mr. Cross. The kids will be honored to perform those pieces. Then I called the local newspaper editor, Janet Morrison. Janet, about the coverage of the memorial ceremony. I'd like to make sure the community understands what we're celebrating. It's already shaping up to be a wonderful story, Terry. A community coming together to honor local heroes. I want people to understand that this isn't just a ceremony. It's a reminder of what we owe to the men who sacrificed everything and what we owe to the values they died protecting. That's a powerful message. Janet, there's something else. I'd like the coverage to include quotes from local veterans about what honor and loyalty mean in practical terms. Not abstract concepts, but real-world applications. Are you thinking about any specific applications? Family loyalty, remembering where you came from. The difference between being sophisticated and being genuine. Janet was quiet for a moment. Terry, is this about more than just honoring veterans? Everything worthwhile is about more than it appears to be on the surface. By noon, I had commitments from 47 local veterans to attend the ceremony. Word was spreading through the American Legion, the VFW, and the informal networks that connect men who've served their country. But the real breakthrough came when I called Mike Henderson, no relation to Blake, who ran the Regional Veterans Organization. Terry, what you're doing sounds incredible. Mind if I reach out to some contacts in Des Moines and Cedar Rapids? This kind of community memorial deserves broader attention. How much broader? Well, I know a guy at Channel 7 who's always looking for positive veteran stories. And the state VFW commander has been talking about finding exemplary local events to highlight in their newsletter. Mike, what if I told you this ceremony was specifically designed to demonstrate the difference between honoring genuine sacrifice and celebrating superficial success? I'd say that sounds like exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. Then yes, reach out to your contacts. Let's make sure this gets the attention it deserves. That afternoon, I did something that felt both nostalgic and necessary. I drove out to the cemetery where Linda was buried. Her headstone was simple, elegant, just her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Wife and Mother." No pretentious quotes, no artistic flourishes, just truth. "Linda, I hope you understand what I'm doing," I said aloud, feeling only slightly foolish. "Sarah's lost her way. She's forgotten everything we taught her about what matters. But I think there's still time to remind her." The wind picked up, rustling the oak trees we'd planted around the cemetery 20 years ago. For just a moment, it sounded like Linda's voice, the way she used to hum while she cooked dinner. "I'm not doing this to hurt her," I continued. "I'm doing this to save her, to show her what she's throwing away for people who'll never love her the way we do." I stayed there for an hour, watching the sunset and remembering the conversations Linda and I used to have about raising Sarah. We'd always agreed that the most important thing wasn't giving her everything she wanted, but teaching her to value the right things. "Spoil her with love, not stuff," Linda used to say. "Teach her that character matters more than comfort." Somewhere along the way, we'd failed. Or maybe we'd succeeded, and Sarah had simply chosen to ignore the lessons either way. She was about to get a refresher course. That evening, Danny Rodriguez called from Houston. "Terry, I've been working on this speech, and I think I've got something that'll knock people's socks off, but I want to run the theme by you first." "I'm listening." "I want to talk about the difference between earning respect and inheriting status. About men who proved their worth through sacrifice versus people who assume their worth through privilege." "Go on." "I want to tell stories about soldiers who died protecting strangers, then contrast that with people who can't even honor the family members who protected them." "Danny, that's exactly what this ceremony needs. There's more. I want to talk about the difference between sophistication and character. About how some people think sophistication means forgetting where you came from. But real sophistication means never forgetting what you owe to the people who got you where you are." "Jesus, Danny, you're going to make people cry." "Terry, by the time I'm done, there won't be a dry eye in that building. And everyone who hears this speech is going to understand exactly what kind of character we're honoring and what kind of character we're not. One more thing, Danny. I want you to mention that this ceremony is happening at the exact same time as other community events, that people had choices about how to spend this day, and they chose to honor genuine sacrifice. You want me to contrast the memorial ceremony with your daughter's wedding without actually mentioning the wedding. I want you to let people draw their own conclusions about what matters more." "Brother, you are diabolical. I love it." After we hung up, I sat in Linda's reading chair and looked around the house where I'd raised my daughter. Every room held memories of teaching her about right and wrong, about loyalty and integrity, about the difference between what's impressive and what's important. In 2 weeks, she'd have to choose between those lessons and the new values Blake's family had taught her. But here's what Sarah didn't understand. I wasn't trying to sabotage her wedding. I was trying to save her soul. And if she chose social status over moral character, if she chose Blake's approval over her father's love, then at least she'd know exactly what she was choosing. At least everyone would know. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect moment. Because what's coming next will show you exactly how a 69-year-old man turns his broken heart into his greatest weapon. But first, I had to make sure that May 15th would be a day Cedar Falls would never forget. The next phase of my plan required something I'd never done before. I had to become a master of public relations. Not the slick, manipulative kind that Blake's world specialized in, but the honest, grassroots kind that actually moves people's hearts. I started with the Cedar Falls Community Facebook page, where I posted a simple announcement. Friends and Neighbors, I'm honored to announce that on May 15th at 2 p.m. we'll be hosting a special Veterans Memorial Ceremony at the Riverside Community Center. We'll be honoring local heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice, with guest speaker Danny Rodriguez, a decorated Vietnam veteran and nationally recognized advocate for veterans' rights. All community members welcome. This event is free and open to the public. Within 6 hours, the post had 43 likes and 17 comments. People were tagging their friends, sharing memories of local veterans, and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to honor fallen heroes. But the real momentum started when Martha Kowalski, whose son had died in Iraq, shared the post with a message that made my chest tight. Thank you, Terry Cross, for giving our community a chance to properly honor the men and women who gave everything for our freedom. This is exactly what Cedar Falls needs, a reminder of what real heroism looks like. Her post was shared 28 times in the first day. The next morning, I got a call from Mayor Patricia Williams. Terry, I saw your announcement about the memorial ceremony. This is a wonderful initiative. Would you mind if I spoke briefly at the event? I'd be honored, Patricia. I also wanted to mention the City Council has been looking for ways to better honor our local veterans. This ceremony could be the start of an annual tradition. That's a beautiful thought. Terry, can I ask what inspired this particular timing? It's wonderful, but it seems like something you've put together quite quickly. I chose my words carefully. Patricia, sometimes you realize that the community needs to be reminded of what's truly important. There's a lot of focus these days on social status and superficial success. I thought it was time to highlight genuine sacrifice and authentic character. That's exactly what this community needs. Count on my full support. By Wednesday, the memorial ceremony had taken on a life of its own. The American Legion post in Cedar Rapids committed to sending a color guard. The local VFW chapters from 3 surrounding counties pledged attendance. Channel 7 confirmed they'd be covering the event for their evening news program. But the moment I knew the plan was working came when Janet Morrison called from the newspaper. Terry, I've been getting calls about your memorial ceremony from as far away as Des Moines. The state veterans organization wants to feature it in their monthly magazine. This is becoming a really big deal. How big? We're estimating close to 300 attendees, maybe more. This might be the largest veterans memorial event in central Iowa this year. 300 people choosing to honor genuine sacrifice, instead of attending other social events happening that same day. Thursday morning brought an unexpected call from Sarah. Dad, what's this I'm hearing about some kind of veterans event you're organizing? A memorial ceremony for local heroes. Why? Blake's mother mentioned that some people are talking about it at the country club. Something about a big community event on Saturday. It's gaining some attention, yes. Dad! Her voice carried a note of suspicion I'd never heard before. This isn't on the same day as my wedding, is it? Sarah, your wedding is at 2 p.m. on Saturday, May 15th. The memorial ceremony is also at 2 p.m. on Saturday, May 15th. Silence. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Dad, are you kidding me right now? I'm not kidding about anything, sweetheart. You're hosting a competing event on the same day as my wedding? I'm hosting a ceremony to honor men who died protecting this country. If that competes with your wedding, what does that say about your wedding? It says you're being vindictive and petty. Sarah, I committed to this memorial ceremony weeks ago. The community is counting on it. Veterans from across the region are planning to attend. Cancel it. Excuse me? Cancel the ceremony. Move it to another day. Dad, this is my wedding day. And this is a day to honor men who sacrificed their lives. For strangers, which do you think matters more? Another silence. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was cold. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, Sarah. I'm doing something for people who deserve to be honored. You're sabotaging my wedding out of spite. I'm giving you a choice. You can spend your day celebrating yourself, or you can spend it honoring heroes. You can choose social status, or you can choose moral character. That's not fair. Fair would have been being included in my daughter's wedding instead of being managed like an embarrassment. Fair would have been my military service being acknowledged instead of hidden. Fair would have been my role as your father being honored instead of minimized. Dad, that's completely different, is it? You're asking me to cancel an event that honors genuine sacrifice so it doesn't interfere with an event that celebrates superficial success. What would your mother think about that choice? Don't you dare bring Mum into this. But I could hear the crack in her voice. She knew exactly what Linda would think. Sarah, I raised you to understand the difference between what's important and what's impressive. This ceremony is happening whether you attend or not, but I hope you'll remember what you were taught about honoring people who earned our respect. Fine, have your little ceremony, but don't expect me to be there. I expect you to make whatever choice you can live with. She hung up without saying goodbye. Friday morning brought validation I hadn't expected. Mike Henderson called with news that made everything worthwhile. Terry, you're not going to believe this. The state commander of the VFW is driving down from Des Moines specifically for your ceremony. He's bringing 3 other state-level officers. Why? He said it's the most genuine community veterans event he's heard about in years. No political agenda, no corporate sponsors, just a community coming together to honor fallen heroes. That's exactly what it is. There's more. The governor's office called this morning. They're sending a representative to present a special recognition, award to the community for organizing such a meaningful tribute. Mike, this is getting bigger than I ever imagined. Terry, this is becoming a landmark event, the kind of ceremony that defines what a community stands for. That afternoon, I drove past the Riverside Country Club, where Sarah's wedding reception would be held. Cars were already arriving for the rehearsal dinner. Luxury sedans and SUVs with out-of-state plates, the kind of vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Then I drove to the community center where my ceremony would take place. Harold Mathis and a crew of volunteers were hanging American flags and setting up folding chairs. The simplicity was beautiful. No expensive decorations, no elaborate staging, just honest preparation for honest purpose. Looking good, Harold. Terry, I've got to tell you, I've been organizing veteran events for 30 years, and I've never felt this kind of community excitement. People understand that this isn't just another ceremony. This is something meaningful. What's the final count? We're expecting over 400 people. We had to bring in extra chairs from the Methodist Church. 400 people choosing substance over superficiality. That evening, Danny Rodriguez called from his hotel room in Cedar Falls. Brother, I've been in town for 3 hours and all anyone's talking about is this memorial ceremony. The desk clerk at the hotel, the waitress at dinner, the guy at the gas station, everyone knows about it. What are they saying? They're saying it's exactly what this community needed, a reminder of what real heroism looks like. Terry, you've created something bigger than a memorial ceremony. You've created a statement about values. And tomorrow, Sarah will have to decide which values matter to her. Have you heard from her since yesterday? Not a word. That's probably for the best. Tomorrow needs to be about choice, not pressure. Danny, I need you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, this ceremony matters. These veterans deserve to be honored, and this community deserves to remember what sacrifice means. Terry, don't worry about tomorrow. I'm going to give a speech that will remind everyone why character matters more than cash, why loyalty matters more than luxury, and why some things are worth more than social status. Just remember, this isn't about destroying anyone. It's about demonstrating what's really important. Brother, by the time I'm done speaking, everyone in that room will understand exactly what kind of people deserve our respect, and exactly what kind of people don't. Saturday morning was clear and bright, the kind of Iowa spring day that makes you grateful to be alive. I dressed in my best suit. Not for Sarah's wedding, but for the memorial ceremony. Not to impress strangers, but to honor heroes. At 1 p.m., I drove to the community center. Cars already filled the parking lot and lined the surrounding streets. News vans from 3 different stations were setting up equipment. Veterans in dress uniforms were gathering near the entrance, their medals catching the afternoon sunlight. Inside, the hall was packed. Every chair filled, people standing along the walls, more arriving every minute. The American flag hung prominently. Behind the podium, flanked by flowers donated by local businesses, this was what community looked like when it came together for something meaningful. At 1:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah. Dad, I'm sorry, I should be there with you. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, the ceremony starts at 2, say. There's still time. Sarah. I can't. The wedding. Blake's family. I'm sorry. I put my phone away and walked toward the podium. My daughter had made her choice. Now everyone would see what she'd chosen. At exactly 2 p.m. on May 15th, 2 very different ceremonies began in Cedar Falls, Iowa. At the Riverside Country Club, 200 carefully selected guests watched Sarah cross walk down a silk-lined aisle toward Blake Henderson III, who waited beneath an arch of imported white roses that cost more than most people's monthly salary. At the Riverside Community Center, 412 people, veterans, farmers, teachers, shop owners, and families who'd lived in Cedar Falls for generations, stood as the high school marching band played the Star-Spangled Banner to honor men who died in foreign lands protecting strangers they'd never met. I knew about Sarah's ceremony because Harold Mathis's nephew worked catering at the country club and had been sending updates all afternoon. Beautiful ceremony, he texted. Very fancy, lot of expensive cars in the parking lot. But I was experiencing something far more powerful than beautiful. I was witnessing what happens when a community remembers its values. Mayor Patricia Williams opened our ceremony with words that cut straight to the heart of what we were doing. Today, we gather not to celebrate ourselves, but to honor those who gave themselves for us. Not to display our success, but to acknowledge our debt. Not to impress our neighbors, but to remember our heroes. The crowd was absolutely silent. You could feel the weight of purpose in that room. Then Danny Rodriguez took the podium. For 37 years, I'd known Danny as a soldier, a businessman, and a friend. But that day, he became something more. He became a voice for every value that seemed to be disappearing from our world. My fellow Americans, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak about sacrifice. Today, we honor men who understood something that our modern world seems to have forgotten, that some things are worth more than personal comfort, more than social status, more than the approval of people who never earned the right to judge us. Murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sergeant Michael Thompson of Cedar Falls died in Vietnam, pulling wounded soldiers from a burning helicopter. He could have stayed safe. He could have waited for backup. Instead, he chose to risk everything for men he'd known for 3 months. Danny paused, letting that sink in. Private First Class Robert Chen died in Afghanistan when he threw himself on a grenade to protect his squad. 22 years old, his whole life ahead of him. But he chose his brothers' lives over his own future. I looked around the room. Veterans were wiping their eyes. Families were holding each other tighter. Young people were hearing stories that would stay with them forever. These men didn't die for money. They didn't die for status. They didn't die to impress anyone. They died because they understood that character means choosing what's right over what's easy, choosing loyalty over luxury, choosing sacrifice over selfishness. My phone buzzed. Another text from Harold's nephew at the country club. Bride looks beautiful. Very elegant wedding. Orchestra playing classical music. I put the phone away. Elegant was fine. But this room was experiencing something sacred, Danny continued, his voice growing stronger. In our modern world, we're told that sophistication means forgetting where we came from, that success means distancing ourselves from the people who raised us, that being refined means being ashamed of simple values like honor, loyalty, and gratitude. He was speaking directly to my heart now, putting into words everything I'd been feeling for months. But I'm here to tell you that real sophistication means never forgetting the people who sacrificed for your future. Real success means honoring the values that built your character. Real refinement means understanding that some things, loyalty to family, respect for sacrifice, gratitude for those who served, are not old-fashioned ideas to be discarded. They are timeless truths to be treasured. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. People were standing, clapping, some crying openly. Danny raised his hand for quiet. Today, you had choices about how to spend your time. There were other events, other celebrations, other ways to spend this beautiful afternoon. But you chose to be here. You chose to honor genuine sacrifice. You chose to remember what really matters. My chest tightened. He was doing exactly what I'd hoped, drawing the contrast without being specific. Some people attend events to be seen. You came here to see clearly. Some people gather to celebrate themselves. You gathered to celebrate heroes. Some people choose comfort. You chose character. Another wave of applause, this one longer and more intense. The men we honor today can't speak for themselves anymore, but their lives spoke volumes about what it means to put others first, to value honor over advantage, to choose sacrifice over selfishness. Danny's voice dropped to something more intimate, more personal. I challenge you to carry that example into your daily lives. When you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, remember Sergeant Thompson. When you have to choose between personal gain and family loyalty, remember Private Chen. When you have to choose between impressing strangers and honoring the people who raised you, remember why we're here today. The silence in that room was absolute. 400 people understanding exactly what they were hearing. Because at the end of our lives, nobody's going to remember what we owned, what we wore, or who we impressed. They're going to remember whether we were people of character, whether we honored our debts, whether we remembered where we came from and who got us there. Danny looked directly at me for just a moment. Whether we chose substance over superficiality. The applause that followed was different from anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't polite social clapping. It was the sound of people whose hearts had been touched by truth. When Danny finished, the high school marching band played Amazing Grace with a precision and reverence that brought tears to eyes throughout the room. Then came Taps, played slowly, perfectly, with the kind of respect that honor demands. During the reception that followed, something remarkable happened. People didn't just stay for the free food and polite conversation. They stayed to talk about values, about character, about what the ceremony had meant to them. Martha Kowalski, whose son had died in Iraq, approached me with tears in her eyes. Terry, this was exactly what our community needed. A reminder that some things are more important than social climbing. Tom Murphy, the caterer whose son had died in Afghanistan, shook my hand with genuine gratitude. That speech about choosing character over comfort, that's something every young person in this town needs to hear. But the conversation that affected me most came from Jenny Patterson, a high school senior who'd attended with her grandparents. Mr. Cross, I've been to a lot of fancy parties and events, but I've never been to anything that felt this important. Like it actually mattered. What made it feel important to you, Jenny? Because it wasn't about us. It was about something bigger than us. And Mr. Rodriguez was right. We did have choices today. I'm glad I chose this. As the afternoon wore on, I received periodic updates from the country club. The wedding ceremony had gone perfectly. The reception was elegant and sophisticated. The orchestra was excellent, the food exceptional, the decorations stunning. Everything had been exactly as Sarah had planned. But then, around 4:30 p.m., something unexpected happened at the country club. Harold's nephew texted, "People here are talking about the veterans ceremony. Someone's phone is showing news coverage of your event. Guests asking why they're not there instead." Then at 5:15 p.m., bride looks upset. People keep mentioning the memorial ceremony. Someone said it was the most meaningful event in Cedar Falls history. And at 5:45 p.m., groom's family seems annoyed. Heard the mother say something about competing events stealing attention from important occasions. The irony was perfect. Sarah had tried to minimize my role in her wedding to avoid embarrassing Blake's family. Instead, my absence was embarrassing them in ways she'd never imagined. At 6 p.m., as our memorial ceremony was winding down with final thank yous and promises to make it an annual tradition, my phone rang. Sarah's number. I stepped outside the community center to take the call. Watching veterans and families saying goodbye, making plans to attend next year's ceremony, discussing how to keep the spirit of the day alive in their daily lives. "Dad?" Her voice was different, smaller somehow. "Hello, Sarah." "Dad, I heard about your ceremony. People are saying it was incredible. It was meaningful. Blake's cousin showed us the news coverage on his phone. Channel 7, Channel 13, even the Des Moines stations picked it up. The community response was overwhelming. Dad, I made a mistake. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to hear what she had to say. I should have been there. I should have been with you, honoring the people who deserved to be honored." "Why? Weren't you?" "Because I was scared. Because I thought Blake's family would judge me if I chose your ceremony over their expectations." "And now?" "Now I realize that their opinion doesn't matter compared to doing what's right." "Dad, I'm so sorry. Sarah, I want you to understand something. I didn't organize this ceremony to hurt you or to sabotage your wedding. I organized it because the community needed to be reminded of what matters." "I know. I see that now. But you did have a choice today, and you chose social status over moral character. You chose impressing strangers over honoring sacrifice. I know, and I chose wrong. The question is, what are you going to choose tomorrow?" Silence for a long moment. "Dad, can I come see you? Tonight? We need to talk." "Of course. You can come see me, sweetheart. This is still your home." After we hung up, I stood outside the community center, watching the last of the attendees drive away. Danny Rodriguez approached, still wearing his dress uniform. "Hell of a day, Terry. Hell of a speech, Danny. Think it worked?" "Look around. 400 people just spent their afternoon being reminded that character matters more than cash. If that's not success, I don't know what is." Danny nodded toward my phone. "Your daughter? She wants to talk tonight. You ready for that conversation?" I looked back at the community center where volunteers were folding chairs and taking down decorations, a place where real values had been celebrated by real people. "Danny, I've been ready for that conversation her whole life. The question is whether she's finally ready to listen." But I had no idea that Sarah's late-night visit would reveal something that would change everything I thought I understood about my daughter's choices. And I certainly had no idea that Blake Henderson III was about to make the biggest mistake of his privileged life. Sarah arrived at my house just after 9 p.m., still wearing her wedding dress. Not the elaborate cathedral-length gown she'd worn for the ceremony, but the simpler reception dress she'd changed into for dancing. Even in the porch light, I could see mascara stains on her cheeks. "Dad, thank you for seeing me." "Come in, sweetheart. Do you want some coffee?" "Please." We sat at the kitchen table where she'd done homework for 12 years, where Linda had taught her to braid friendship bracelets, where we'd shared thousands of conversations about everything from boys to college applications to her dreams for the future. But this conversation felt different, heavier. Dad, I need to tell you something about today, about why I really didn't come to your ceremony. I'm listening. It wasn't just about Blake's family having expectations. It was about me being a coward. I poured coffee for both of us, giving her time to find her words. When I heard you were organizing a Veterans Memorial Ceremony, my first thought wasn't about schedule conflicts or social obligations. My first thought was that you were showing everyone who I really am. What do you mean? Dad, for the past 3 years, I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. I've been letting Blake's family believe that I come from their kind of background, that I share their values, that I'm naturally sophisticated. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, like she was trying to warm something deeper than her. Fingers, I've been lying, Dad, to them, to Blake, to myself, about our life, about your service, about Mom's death, about what it was like growing up here. What kind of lies, Sarah? I told Blake's mother that you were a successful contractor, who chose to live simply, not that you worked 3 jobs to pay for my education. I told his father that you served in Vietnam, but never mentioned the Bronze Star or the Purple Heart. I told their friends that I went to Northwestern on academic merit, but never mentioned that you worked weekends for 4 years to pay the tuition. That the scholarship didn't cover. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm. Why? Because I thought their approval was worth more than your truth. She started crying then, not the delicate tears of a bride overwhelmed by emotion, but the raw, ugly crying of someone whose heart was breaking. Dad, when people at the wedding started talking about your ceremony, when they started saying it, was the most meaningful event in Cedar Falls history, I realized that everyone in this town knew who you really are, and I'd been ashamed of it. Sarah, no, let me finish. Blake's cousin showed us the news coverage on his phone, and there you were, standing next to the state VFW commander, receiving a community service award for organizing the most successful Veterans Memorial Ceremony in the region's history. 400 people choosing to honor genuine sacrifice. She wiped her eyes with a napkin, smearing what was left of her makeup. And where was I? At a country club, eating $1,000 cake with people who've never sacrificed anything for anyone, pretending to be someone I'm not, to impress people who judge everyone by their bank accounts. What did Blake say when he saw the coverage? Sarah's expression darkened. That's what I really need to tell you about. She pulled out her phone and swiped to a video. I recorded this during the reception. I need you to hear what Blake said when his family was talking about your ceremony. She pressed play, and Blake's voice filled my kitchen. Honestly, I'm not surprised that Sarah's father would pull a stunt like this. The man clearly has issues. With our family's social status, this whole veterans thing is obviously designed to make us look bad. My hands clenched around my coffee mug. Blake's voice continued. Sarah's been trying to distance herself from this small-town mentality for years. The last thing we need is her father dragging her back into this blue-collar hero worship. Blue-collar hero worship? I looked at Sarah. Wait, there's more. Blake's voice. My mother thinks we should consider limiting contact with Sarah's family after the honeymoon. These people clearly don't understand appropriate boundaries. These people... Sarah stopped the recording. Dad, there's something else, something I should have told you months ago. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Blake made me sign this. I unfolded the paper. It was a legal document, drafted on Blake's law firm letterhead, a prenuptial agreement, read the family contact provisions. I scanned the document until I found the relevant section. What I read made my blood go cold. Party B, Sarah, agrees to limit contact with immediate family members to no more than 6 occasions per calendar year, with advance approval from Party A, Blake, regarding timing and duration of visits. Sarah, this isn't a prenuptial agreement. This is a control document. Keep reading. Party B agrees that Party A has final approval over all social media posts, public statements, and family communications that might reflect on Party A's professional reputation or social standing. I set the document down carefully. How long have you been living under these restrictions? Since we got engaged. Blake said it was normal for people in his social circle. That family management was part of maintaining professional image. Family management. Dad, I haven't been allowed to call you without Blake's permission for 8 months. I haven't been allowed to visit unless he approved the timing. I haven't been allowed to tell anyone the real story about how you raised me because Blake said it would reflect poorly on his family's social status. The pieces were falling into place. Sarah's gradual distance, her careful conversations, her embarrassment about our life together. It hadn't been a natural evolution. It had been systematic isolation. Sarah, this is abuse. I know. I've known. For months. But I thought it was the price of the life I wanted. What changed your mind? Today, sitting in that country club, listening to Blake's family mock your ceremony, hearing them call you pathetic for caring about dead soldiers more than social obligations. Her voice grew stronger, angrier. Dad, I realized that I'd traded the love of the best man I've ever known for the approval of people who think character is a weakness. What are you going to do about it? I already did something about it. She pulled another document from her purse. I had Blake's cousin. He's a lawyer too. Look at the prenuptial agreement tonight during the reception. Turns out the family contact restrictions are legally unenforceable and could be grounds for annulment based on coercive marriage conditions. Annulment? Dad, I'm not going on the honeymoon. I'm not moving to Blake's apartment in Chicago. I'm getting this marriage annulled on grounds of fraud and coercion. I stared at my daughter, seeing something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. The determination that used to drive her to excel in school, to fight for what she believed in, to stand up for underdogs. Are you sure about this, Sarah? Dad, today you organized a ceremony that honored men who died for strangers. Blake organized a wedding designed to impress people who don't care about anyone but themselves. She leaned forward, taking my hands. You gave me a choice today between character and comfort, between substance and superficiality. I chose wrong the first time, but I'm choosing again. What about Blake? What about his family? What about them? Dad, these are people who think your military service is something to be hidden, who think your sacrifice for my education is embarrassing, who think your love for me is inappropriate because it doesn't serve their social agenda. They won't make this easy for you. I don't want easy anymore. I want real. We talked until almost midnight, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was talking to my actual daughter instead of some performance she'd been giving. She told me about the isolation, the gradual erosion of her confidence, the way Blake's family had convinced her that everything about her background was something to overcome, rather than something to treasure. Dad, when I heard Danny Rodriguez's speech on the news, when I heard him talking about choosing loyalty over luxury, I realized that you'd been trying to save me from myself. I was trying to remind you who you are. Mission accomplished. Just before she left, Sarah hugged me the way she used to when she was little, fierce and complete, like she was trying to absorb strength for whatever came next. Dad, I'm sorry it took me so long to remember what you taught me. What's that? That the opinion of people who've never sacrificed anything isn't worth sacrificing everything for. After she drove away, I sat in my kitchen for another hour, processing everything that had happened. My plan had worked, but not in the way I'd expected. I'd thought I was teaching Sarah a lesson about values. Instead, I'd given her the courage to save herself from a life that would have slowly destroyed everything good about her. But I had no idea that Blake Henderson III wasn't the type of man who accepted rejection gracefully. I had no idea that the real battle was just beginning, and I had no idea that my old-fashioned values were about to clash with new-fashioned vindictiveness in ways that would test everything I believed about honor, justice, and the power of doing what's right. The war Blake Henderson III declared on my family began Monday morning at 7:43 a.m. with a phone call that would have destroyed a weaker man. Mr. Cross, this is Attorney Blake Henderson representing Henderson versus Cross in the matter of fraudulent misrepresentation and intentional interference with contractual relations. I'd been drinking coffee and reading about our memorial ceremony. In the morning paper, front page coverage with a photo of me shaking hands with the state VFW commander. But Blake's voice cut through my good mood like a blade through silk. Blake, what the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about your deliberate sabotage of my wedding through fraudulent misrepresentation of your character and malicious interference. With my marriage contract, I set down my coffee cup very carefully. In English, Blake, you deliberately organized a competing event to damage my wedding's social impact. You misrepresented yourself as a community leader when you're actually a vengeful old man seeking to destroy your daughter's happiness. And you engaged in systematic manipulation to convince Sarah to breach her marital obligations. Are you seriously threatening to sue me for honoring veterans? I'm informing you that I've filed papers seeking damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation of character, and interference with contractual relations. You're going to pay for what you've done to my family's reputation. The audacity was breathtaking. The man who'd isolated my daughter from her family, who'd forced her to sign agreements restricting her contact with me, who'd spent months convinced that her father was an embarrassment. This man was claiming that I'd damaged his reputation. Blake, let me ask you something. Do you actually believe the words coming out of your mouth? I believe in protecting my family from manipulative individuals who use emotional blackmail to interfere with legal contracts. Legal contracts? You mean the prenuptial agreement that restricted Sarah's contact with her own father? Silence. Then Blake's voice returned, colder and more calculated. That document was a standard family management protocol designed to protect both parties' interests. Family management protocol. Is that what you call isolation and control? Mr. Cross, I'm calling as a professional courtesy to inform you of pending legal action. You have 48 hours to retain counsel before I proceed with filing in federal court. Federal court. Interference with interstate commerce. Sarah's marriage to me would have involved business relationships spanning multiple states. Your sabotage constitutes federal interference with commercial interests. I almost laughed. Blake, you're threatening to take me to federal court for honoring dead veterans. I'm taking you to federal court for systematic manipulation designed to destroy legally binding relationships. What legally binding relationships? Sarah's annulment papers were filed this morning. Another silence, longer this time. That annulment will be challenged. The marriage was consummated and legally valid. Sarah's decision was made under duress caused by your emotional manipulation. The duress was caused by your control and isolation, not my love. We'll let a judge decide that. 48 hours, Mr. Cross. Find a lawyer. He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden quiet of my kitchen. I called Sarah immediately. Dad, I was about to call you. Blake's been calling me since 6 a.m., threatening. All kinds of legal action. He just called me too. Sarah, are you safe? I'm staying at Jennifer's apartment until this gets sorted out. Dad, Blake is completely unhinged. He's claiming that your memorial ceremony was designed to sabotage our marriage. He's threatening to sue me in federal court. For what? Apparently, honoring veterans constitutes interference with interstate commerce. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Dad, there's something I didn't tell you last night. Blake didn't just isolate me from you. He's been building a file on our family for months. What kind of file? Financial records, social media posts, anything he could use to paint us as unstable or manipulative. He's been planning this legal strategy since before the engagement. My chest tightened, planning what legal strategy, in case I ever tried to leave him. Blake told me that if I ever tried to embarrass his family through divorce, he'd destroy our reputation and make sure you lost your business. He threatened my business. Dad, Blake's father has connections with state licensing boards, municipal, contractors, anyone who could make trouble for a construction company. The picture was getting clearer. Blake hadn't just been controlling Sarah's contact with me. He'd been researching ways to destroy me if she ever chose her family over his manipulation. Sarah, I need you to document everything. Every threat, every attempt at control, every restriction he placed on your communication with me, I already started. Dad, I recorded some of our conversations over the past few months. I think I knew this day was coming. Good girl. In the meantime, I'm going to make some calls. The first call I made was to James Morrison, the lawyer who'd handled Linda's estate. Jim was old school Cedar Falls, honest, tough, and unimpressed by out-of-town bullies. Terry, I heard about that memorial ceremony, hell of a thing you organized. Jim, I need legal advice. My daughter's ex-husband is threatening federal lawsuits over my organizing that ceremony. Come again? Blake Henderson claims that honoring veterans constitutes interference with his marriage contract. Jim was quiet for a long moment. Terry, is this the same Blake Henderson whose family had to settle 3 discrimination lawsuits with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission last year? I don't know. What kind of discrimination? Age discrimination at their law firm. Turns out they've been systematically forcing out partners over 55 to make room for younger associates. Cost them $2.3 million in settlements. Jim, how do you know this? Because I represented 2 of the partners they tried to push out. Blake Henderson II has a reputation for using legal intimidation to solve personal problems. So this runs in the family. Terry, bring me everything Blake has threatened, and I'll show you how to turn his legal strategy against him. The second call I made was to Mike Henderson at the Veterans Organization. Mike, I need a favor. Can you find out if Blake Henderson III has any kind of record with veterans organizations? Any statements about military service? Any positions on veterans issues? I can make some calls. Why? He's threatening to sue me for organizing our memorial ceremony. Claims it was designed to sabotage his marriage. He's suing you for honoring veterans? That's what he claims. Terry, give me 2 hours. I'll find out everything there is to know about Blake Henderson's relationship with veterans issues. The third call I made was to Danny Rodriguez in Houston. Danny, I need to ask you about something. Did you record your speech at our ceremony? Of course. I always record speeches for my archives. Why? I may need that recording for legal purposes. Legal purposes? The groom from my daughter's wedding is threatening to sue me for organizing the memorial ceremony. Claims it was designed to sabotage his marriage. Danny's laughter was not pleasant. Terry, this boy has no idea who he's messing with, does he? What do you mean? I mean that speech I gave was recorded by Channel 7, archived by the State Veterans Organization, and broadcast on 3 different networks. It's now part of the public record as an exemplary tribute to American veterans. And anyone who claims that honoring veterans is actually about sabotaging marriages is going to look like an unpatriotic jackass in front of any judge in America. By noon, I had assembled a legal strategy that would have made Sun Tzu proud. Jim Morrison confirmed that Blake's father had a pattern of using lawsuits to intimidate people who threatened his family's interests. But he also confirmed that the Henderson family law firm was currently under investigation by the State Bar Association for ethical violations. Mike Henderson called back with information that made me smile. Terry, Blake Henderson III has never donated to a veterans organization, never participated in veterans events, and actually tried to get out of giving a free legal consultation to a disabled veteran last year. How do you know that? because the disabled veteran was my brother-in-law. Blake told him that veterans' legal issues were outside his area of expertise and suggested he find a public defender. Danny Rodriguez emailed me a complete transcript of his speech, along with audio and video recordings. Terry, that speech, is now being used by veterans organizations in 4 states as an example of community leadership. Anyone who attacks it attacks the entire veterans community. But the most important call came from Sarah at 3 p.m. Dad, Blake just made a huge mistake. What kind of mistake? He called Jennifer's apartment and left a voicemail threatening to have me committed for psychological evaluation if I don't withdraw the annulment papers. He threatened to have you committed. Dad, I recorded the call. Blake actually said that any woman who would choose her father over her husband must be mentally unstable and that he has connections with psychiatric facilities. Sarah, that's not just a mistake. That's evidence of his real character. There's more. He also said that he's going to make sure you lose every construction contract in the state because his father has connections with municipal licensing boards. He threatened my livelihood? Dad, Blake has completely lost control. He's not thinking like a lawyer anymore. He's thinking like a spoiled rich kid who's never been told no. That evening I sat in my kitchen with Jim Morrison, reviewing Blake's threats and our response strategy. Terry, this boy has handed us a gift, Jim said, studying the documents. He's threatened an elderly veteran's livelihood because his wife chose her family over his control. No judge in America is going to sympathize with that. What's our next move? We file a countersuit, harassment, intimidation, threatening behavior, attempted financial coercion. Plus, we ask for a restraining order preventing him from contacting you or Sarah. Will it work? Terry, Blake Henderson III, just declared war on a 69-year-old veteran who organized the most successful community memorial ceremony in state history. He's threatening to destroy your business because your daughter chose character over control. Jim smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. This isn't going to be a legal battle. This is going to be a public relations massacre. Wednesday morning brought validation beyond anything I could have hoped for. The Cedar Falls newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Veteran Threatened with Lawsuit for Honoring Fallen Heroes." The article detailed Blake's threats, his claims that our memorial ceremony was designed to sabotage his marriage, and his attempts to use legal intimidation against a community leader. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. By noon, the newspaper had received 47 letters to the editor supporting me and condemning Blake's threats. The mayor's office issued a statement praising our memorial ceremony and expressing concern about legal threats against community volunteers. Channel 7 ran a follow-up story featuring interviews with veterans who'd attended our ceremony. Harold Mathias spoke for all of them. Terry Cross organized the most meaningful veterans event in our community's history. Anyone who attacks him for honoring our fallen heroes is attacking every veteran in this state. But the moment I knew we'd won, it came when Mike Henderson called with news that changed everything. Terry, you're not going to believe this. The National VFW organization wants to present you with their Community Leadership Award at their national convention. For what? For organizing a memorial ceremony that exemplifies American values and community spirit. They're calling it a model for how communities should honor veterans. Mike, what does this mean for Blake's lawsuit? Terry, Blake Henderson III is now threatening to sue a man who's being honored by the largest veterans organization in America. He's finished. Thursday morning, Blake's lawyer called to withdraw all legal threats and apologize for any misunderstanding. Friday morning, Sarah called to tell me that Blake had left town without a forwarding address. Saturday morning, I received a letter from the governor's office, thanking me for my service to the veterans community and inviting me to serve on the State Veterans Affairs Advisory Board. But the real victory came Sunday morning, when Sarah knocked on my door carrying 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper with "Our memorial ceremony featured in the Sunday magazine section. Dad, I brought coffee, and I thought maybe we could talk about what I want to do with my life now that I remember who I really am." We sat at the kitchen table where she'd grown up, where Linda had taught her to value character over comfort, where I'd tried to show her the difference between what's impressive and what's important. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Danny Rodriguez said in his speech about choosing substance over superficiality. What about it? I want to do something meaningful with my life, something that honors the values you taught me." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to work with veterans, families, help them navigate the legal system, connect them with resources, advocate for their rights." "That sounds perfect for you, sweetheart." "Dad, I also want to make our memorial ceremony an annual tradition, something that reminds this community every year about what really matters." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. The determined little girl who'd wanted to make the world better, who'd believed that character mattered more than cash, who'd known the difference between right and wrong even when it wasn't easy. Blake Henderson III had tried to buy her soul with social status and threatened to destroy our family when she chose love over luxury. Instead, he'd given her back to herself and given me back my daughter. But the real lesson wasn't about winning or losing. It was about what happens when you choose character over comfort, when you choose loyalty over luxury, when you choose substance over superficiality. Sometimes the choice is harder than you think it should be, but it's always worth making. And that's exactly what I want to show you in what happens next. 6 months later, I stood in the same community center where we'd held our memorial ceremony, but this time for a very different kind of celebration. Sarah's wedding, her real wedding, not to some trust fund lawyer who wanted to control her life, but to David Chen, a social worker who'd met her while she was volunteering at the Veterans Counseling Center, a man who loved her stories about her childhood, who asked me about my military service with genuine respect, who understood that marrying Sarah meant embracing our entire family history. The wedding was simple, beautiful, and authentic. About 50 people who actually knew and loved Sarah, not 200 strangers assembled to impress other strangers. Danny Rodriguez flew in from Houston to give a toast about love that builds people up instead of tearing them down. But the moment that made everything worthwhile came during the ceremony itself, when Sarah looked directly at me and spoke words I'll treasure forever. "Dad, you taught me that character matters more than comfort, that loyalty matters more than luxury, that some things are worth more than social status. I forgot those lessons for a while, but you never stopped believing in the person you raised me to be. Thank you for loving me enough to let me find my way back to who I really am." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the ceremony, as we were cleaning up, Harold Matisse approached me with a smile. "Terry, I've got news about our memorial ceremony. The State Veterans Organization wants to make it an annual event, and they're asking you to coordinate the statewide program." "Statewide?" 43 communities want to hold their own versions next year, based on what we did here. You're going to be traveling all over Iowa, helping communities honor their veterans. Harold, that sounds like a full-time job. It is. They're offering to pay you as a state contractor. Good money, excellent benefits, and you'd be doing something that matters. I looked around the community center, where Sarah and David were laughing with friends, where veterans were sharing stories with young people, where a community had come together to celebrate something real. Harold, I accept. That evening, as the last guests were leaving, Sarah approached me with an envelope. "Dad, David and I have something for you." Inside was a deed to a small house about 2 blocks from Sarah and David's apartment. "Sarah, what is this?" It's your new home if you want it, close enough that we can have dinner together every Sunday, far enough that you have your privacy. David and I want to take care of you the way you took care of me." I looked at the deed, then at my daughter's face, glowing with happiness and purpose. "Sweetheart, I don't need you to take care of me. I know you don't need us to. I want us to. Dad, I want my children to grow up knowing their grandfather, hearing his stories, learning his values. Your children?" Sarah and David exchanged a look that made my heart skip. "We're not making any announcements yet, but you're going to be a grandpa, Dad." I hugged my daughter then, right there in the community center where we'd honored genuine sacrifice, where I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply living according to your values and trusting that truth will win in the end. "Dad," Sarah whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long to remember what you taught me." "What's that, sweetheart?" "That the opinion of people who've never sacrificed anything isn't worth sacrificing everything for." As I drove home that night, I thought about Blake Henderson III, wherever he was. I wondered if he'd learned anything from his defeat, if he'd ever understand that you can't buy character or intimidate integrity. Probably not. Men like Blake rarely learn lessons that require humility. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My concern was the grandchild who'd grow up hearing stories about honor and loyalty, who'd learn the difference between what's impressive and what's important, who'd understand that some things are worth more than money. My concern was the communities across Iowa where veterans would be honored by people who understood what sacrifice really means. My concern was Sarah, who'd found her way back to the values that matter, who'd chosen substance over superficiality, character over comfort. You see, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's demonstration. It's showing people what real values look like, then trusting them to make their own choices. Some people will choose correctly, others won't, but at least they'll know what they're choosing. And you? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought for your daughter's soul? Or would you have accepted being minimized and managed? I want to know your thoughts in the comments below, because the truth is, we all face moments when we have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between impressing strangers and honoring the people who love us, between social status and moral character. The question isn't whether those moments will come. The question is what we'll choose when they do. I chose love. I chose truth. I chose to demonstrate that character matters more than cash, that loyalty matters more than luxury, that some things are worth fighting for even when the fight is hard. It was the best choice I ever made. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of what really matters in this world, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because sometimes the old-fashioned values really are the ones worth keeping. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about honor, loyalty, and the kind of love that never gives up. And remember, when someone tries to convince you that your values are outdated, that your love is embarrassing, that your character is a weakness, they're not trying to improve you, they're trying to control you. Don't let them. Stay true to what matters. Stay faithful to the people who've earned your loyalty. Stay committed to the values that built your character, because in the end, that's all any of us really have, and it's more than enough.